Hello and welcome back to AP World History and Modern. Today we're going to begin our first day, first of second to 2 days, on Unit 5.3, the Introduction to the Industrial Revolution. Our learning objective is to explain how environmental factors contributed to industrialization from 1750 to 1900. And we're going to kind of run through the factors that contributed to the industrial production and eventual result of the Industrial Revolution. And I guess we're going to start by looking at I guess a few things, regarding kind of what this is. And if there is, some good examples of divergences in history or turning points in history, the Atlantic revolutions are definitely a good example. And the Industrial Revolution is another kind of great example. Right. So we're seeing this process kind of get underway. Right at the beginning of our time period, right? And by the time we get to the end of this time period, by 1900, it will not only be fully developed in the places of its origin, it'll be spreading all over the planet, and its consequences will be felt everywhere on Earth. All right, so these are things we've already kind of looked at, and I kind of threw this again, threw this in again. I had shown this at the French Revolution. Because if you're talking about the Industrial Revolution, obviously the bourgeoisie is going to become a topic here. So these are our merchant class, our growing middle class, right? So and these are going to become the ultimate beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution. So to begin with here, let's just kind of look at these different environmental factors that existed in England. And and were they really unique? Right? Were they really unique? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna just create a I guess we call it a Venn diagram. All right, so let's kind of create a little Venn diagram here. Run across the top, and we'll kind of focus here in the center. In England. All right, so Great Britain. All right, Great Britain, England. All right, and one thing I just want to explore today is this idea of were these environmental factors truly unique to England, or did they exist elsewhere or other places? And why didn't the Industrial Revolution happen in other places? So the prime candidate for where this could have happened would be a place like China. So why doesn't it happen in China? Which of these preconditions that we're going to talk about, doesn't exist in China? So let's go ahead and begin. All right, so let's kind of do this with different colors. All right, so our first one here, proximity. Proximity to waterways. All right, proximity to waterways. Access to rivers and canals. All right, so what do we know about England? What do we know about Great Britain with this? We know, let's kind of slide this over, that there really is kind of no place in England, definitely not in other parts of the United Kingdom. No place in England more than about 100 miles from the coast. So if there's not a river connecting a place in Europe, a place in England to waterways, then it's not too challenging to connect it via a canal. All right. So I'm going to slide this over now to China. All right. So what about China regarding this? Right. We know that we've got the Huanghe and the Yangtze rivers, massive river systems. But also we know that there is a long history of canal building, going back to, at least the Han Dynasty. 2,000 plus years ago. But one thing that we have talked about in class, right, is the Grand Canal, right? So China has a very long history of canal building, connecting, great distances by canal, right? So the Grand Canal, we know that this was built in the 500s. That's in the Common Era, okay, by the Sui dynasty, okay, and expanded by the Song dynasty. All right, so we know that there's a pretty large network of canals that already exists in China. So, does this, kind of economic or environmental factor, is this the difference maker? I would argue not. Okay. All right. Our next possible fact here: geographic distribution of coal, iron, and timber. Right. Geographic distribution of coal, iron, and timber. All right. So let's look at that idea as a contributing factor. Geographic distribution of coal, iron, timber. Okay. Let's kind of look at this, right? In England, I'm going to keep that slid up there. All right. So what do we know about coal in England? We know that it is close to the surface, right? We know that it is close to the surface, so easily, E-A-S-I-L-Y, there you go, easily accessible, right? Easily accessible, and let me just kind of put a little note on there. Initially, at least, right? Initially, it is easily accessible. Obviously, as those deposits begin to get exploited, you're gonna have to start doing some serious digging, and of course, that is going to create new problems. New problems will have to get solved, which will then lead to innovations such as the steam engine. All right, so Mr. Watts. All right. So that's coal. As far as iron, is concerned, England does have rich deposits, right? Easily accessible as well. And as far as timber, right? As far as timber is concerned, slide that up a little bit. England really is not that rich in timber. However, neighboring Scandinavia is, right? Neighboring Scandinavia is. So very easy to trade and get access to timber. Right, so access to timber from neighboring Scandinavia. And all right, so let's move this over to China. Right, so how does China fare in regards to these? So are these the environmental factors that England had that China did not? All right, let's kind of look. So as far as coal, right, we know that this had been used for hundreds of years. Right, had been used for hundreds of years. We actually read about this during the Song dynasty. Right, their use of this, right, and we also know that it was reported back to Europe by Marco Polo. Right, so in his book, he talks about how the Chinese would burn rocks for fuel. Right, so obviously China has coal. right? And of course, if you know anything about modern day China, you know that they burn a lot of coal, right? So there's plenty of access to coal. As far as iron is concerned, we know that there is large scale use during the Song era, right? Large scale use of iron during the Song era, right? And then timber. Right. Let me just kind of put this in red because this actually is a problem. Deforestation, right? Deforestation was an issue in China, right? So this one actually was a shortage, right? Shortages did exist in regards to timber, but bamboo will eventually kind of come to replace that as a material. All right, how about this one? Urbanization. Right? Was the big dynamic difference between these two places urbanization. Right? So let's look at urbanization. Urbanization, the growing of cities, and of course, if you're trying to use this to say that didn't exist in China. China had many large cities for a millennia and more. I've shown you some lists over the years so far of top 10 largest cities on Earth at whatever time frame, and China always has at least half of that list. So urbanization is something that China already enjoyed. And England does have a major city, kind of an old city going way back to Roman times, of London. But what we're talking about here is this is a new process, right? That is undergoing in England. So this is a new process underway in the north of England. And you can see on that map where that urbanization was going on, right? So taking place up here in the Manchester, Liverpool area. These become the large manufacturing hubs. You see, over in Wales, right? The coal mining hubs, and also you'll see some textile facilities here as well. So these are where the mining is taking place. The iron processing or the textile production is where you're going to see that urbanization take place. So always on rivers or on the coast. Right? All right. So urbanization. So nothing unique nothing unique there for England with that one. All right. So let's go to the next one. Improved agricultural productivity. So I'm just going to slide that back up. Just give me a little more leeway here. All right. Improved agricultural productivity. All right, and what are we seeing here regarding this? Undoubtedly, this is the case. All right, this is going to be the case in England. So, kind of post 1700s, numerous innovations in agriculture. And just numerous innovations in agriculture taking place in England, and of course the range of this is tremendous, right? So from from machines, right? I.e., like the Jethro Tull seed drill, right? To things like new crop rotation techniques, to things like selective breeding. B-R-E-A-D. I don't know. Spelling weakness here. All right. Selective breeding. All right. So there's all kinds of massive innovations that are taking place in England here, right? And what are we seeing in China, right, at this time? I think this is a place where we can say, right, is, let's just say, most agricultural innovations used in 1700s were Song Dynasty era innovations. Okay, so they were using, right? They were using techniques that were from hundreds of years earlier, or right. I will throw in. It's possible I am not aware. Right? I will throw in the possibility that there are major agricultural innovations taking place in China in the 1700s that I simply am not aware of. Because my knowledge is, of course, finite. All right. So that's that one. All right. So let's kind of go through down to the next one. Legal protection of private property. All right. Legal protection of private property. Legal protection of private property. All right, and what do we know about England in this case? All right, legal protection of private property. All right. So we know that in England, right, we have a whole bunch of a whole lot of history. Going back to the 1100s, with the establishment of English common law. And we know that you kind of look at the Parliament. Parliament had a history, right? A history of passing laws to protect private property as well. So private property rights had been on the increase. Right? Parliament had a history of increasing protections for private property. Things like, if you want an example of this, the whole enclosure movement would be a really good example of that. All right, so there's that. All right, now in the case of China, I'm gonna get out my red pen again. All right, so I wasn't sure if this was just a general weakness of my content knowledge. So I kind of did a little digging. I came across this document, which it looks like it was created, in California, to meet the California standards, right? And it's looking at the legal codes under the Qing era. And if I'm getting the gist of this, I'm kind of zoom that in so that you can see it a little better. It looks like we have a continuity of law codes from the Tang Code era, right? So the Great Tang Code, or the Tang Code, comes from the Tang Dynasty, which was the dynasty that followed the Sui, right, before the Song Dynasty. So you have Tang Dynasty, kind of great golden age. We've seen the Tang Code before because the Tang Code gets diffused to Japan during the 700s, and this becomes the foundation for Japanese law as well. And it looks like we have a continuity of Tang legal codes, which would make sense, right? Because the Tang Code was adapted during the Song era, right, in this period of kind of early Neo-Confucianism, and during the Yuan period, we see kind of a movement away from this, but the Ming will revive these traditions, and so the Ming, we see the kind of rise of Neo-Confucianism again, and the Qing will perpetuate the Neo-Confucianism and Tang Code. So the Great Qing Code of 1740 established the ultimate format of China's criminal civil code. Laws reaching back more than 2,000 years, right? So it's a perpetuation, a continuation of Confucianism, which was codified, with some legalism into the Tang Code, and it simply perpetuated that. So the first part of the code begins with the 5 punishments, right? And and then you can kind of see those punishments, and kind of looking at there's all kinds of other examples here, of some excerpts, and there definitely seems to be some protections of private property. I think you could kind of imply that from this, that there is law enforcement, that there are punishments for criminal violations. There's references here to inheritances and the such, but so the most common lawsuits concern land disputes within families, right? But this is not quite the same, right? This is not quite the same. We see after Sun Yat-sen and the Qing dynasty. Qing dynasty falls in 1911. We see the rise of the Chinese Republic under Sun Yat-sen initially, and so we do see an adoption of a German law code. And Taiwan still applies this today, which makes sense because Chiang Kai-shek, goes to Taiwan in 49. So that would be a perpetuation of that 1911 Chinese Republic. So that makes sense. Okay, but as far as when you look at China during this period, the legal protections do not seem to be as explicit or being catered towards merchants, right? It seems to be more perpetuation of filial piety and Confucian beliefs. So, right, so not as strong of protection for merchants. It's more, it's the Tang Code and Neo-Confucian, is largely what the law code is there. All right, at least that's as far as I could interpret from that. All right, and okay. So what else do we have here? Let's kind of scoot over real quick and talk about this one here. The accumulation of capital. All right, and this is kind of an interesting one. All right, so the accumulation of capital. So let me. Probably the best thing to do here is just flip this and let me get it so you can actually see it. All right. Access to foreign resources, accumulation of capital. All right. So once again, let's create our little T-chart. All right. And we're doing similarities. We're doing Great Britain, and we're doing China. Okay. And so where were we just at? It was access to foreign resources. Access to foreign resources. and I think I think they both have access to Indian Ocean. Right, access to the Indian Ocean and the Americas via Manila. Okay, the Spanish colony there in Manila. So they definitely would have had access to all of that, right? And the same is true with Great Britain, right? So I'm just going to write same, right? So access to foreign resources, right? All right, I probably shouldn't have done that in red because now I took that off the table. All right, the next one. The next one is accumulation of capital, all right? So was there an accumulation of capital? And let's kind of look at China, right? So what is going on in China that would, if you're talking about merchants, right? Then you're talking about the trade and luxury goods, right? So things like silk, porcelain, lacquered, right? Lacquered goods / furniture. These kind of traditional high-end luxury goods. And also kind of the new big thing is tea, right? Kind of during this time period. We see tea come into its own as a as a product. Right. So when you're kind of looking at this, right, how are they making their money? This is things like manufacturing, right? Manufacturing and this is agriculture. All right. How about accumulation of capital in England? Now, keep in mind, we're not going to have textile factories as one of the factors for accumulation of capital because we're supposed to be talking about which factors contributed to the industrialization. The rise of the textile manufacturing that eventually takes place there. So what are we actually talking about here? And the answer is things like colonies. Okay, colonies. So, for example, North America, up until 1776, you have the 13 colonies plus Canada. And, by the time the American Revolution is done, the Industrial Revolution is already underway. So even the 13 colonies would have contributed to the accumulation of capital, by Great Britain, right? So 13 colonies plus Canada. All right. And so, post 7 Years' War. All right. But also Jamaica, right? In colonies like Jamaica. So, these are plantation. Right? These are plantation colonies. Enslaved Africans are the form of chattel slavery. Chattel slavery as a form of coerced labor. So we're talking sugarcane. All right. So they would have had access to their colonies and, of course, all the other colonies that were bringing stuff into Europe. But there's also something else, right? The joint stock companies. Right? And of course, these colonies originate as joint stock companies, but you're also going to see things like the British East India Company, and during the kind of during the pre-industrial revolution era, pre-1800, they're largely involved in carrying trade. Okay, so that's going to be part of what helps with accumulation of wealth. Companies like the Royal West Africa Company. Obviously, they're involved in the Atlantic slave trade. Okay, so you have companies like that, and there's numerous examples if you wanted to kind of dig into these, things that you probably learned about when you were like in fourth grade, Hudson Bay Company and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of joint stock companies that existed. So these are, so I guess this is a kind of a difference, right? There is definitely a difference here. Right, difference here. So the difference being the accumulation of capital is taking place in China through manufacturing and through agriculture, whereas in the case of England, a lot of this wealth accumulation is taking place through investment. So that is a bit of a difference, right? That is maybe a unique difference. So we're seeing some differences in law, right, and protection of private property rights, and we're also seeing some differences in the accumulation of capital. All right, and of course that next little blurb here. Let me hit it with it. There we go. All right, so this last little bit here, the development of the factory system. Development factory system concentrated production in a single location and led to increasing degree of specialization of labor. So this is going to become one of the effects. Right. So the question is were these unique to only England? And what is it about England that makes it unique? So let's kind of run down through this. This was created by Mr. Freeman here. These are the environmental factors that existed here. Waterways by 1750, England had over 1,000 miles of navigable rivers. Okay. Canal media, mining. Once again, we've already talked about this. Private property. All right. So this becomes one of the differences, right? Private property, the whole point of government is to preserve private property. That's why government exists, right? Adam Smith will write about, and point out things where he sees issues that can be, that can be avoided, things like monopolies and the such. And of course, Parliament, through the enclosure movement, is going to provide additional legal protections. So this is one of our big differences. So this must be one of these, major factors, because this is one of these things that doesn't exist quite the same in China, right? Urbanization, yes, precondition, not what's going to throw you over the wall. Empire, yeah, I mean maybe, right? China going back to the 1430s had not been outward facing; they had been inward facing. So maybe there is something, something to the fact that they did have additional raw materials. But that being said, I think you could probably make an argument that the amount of land that is in China was greater than the land of England and most of its colonies. I guess with the exception, of Canada. I guess Canada might throw you over the top there. But I think China had a very large amount of land and raw material, access to raw materials. So I don't know if that'd be it as well. Agriculture, population increased 7 times from 5 million to 32 million. So when we talk about, right, when we talk about this moment in time, right, there's a couple things happening here. Right, this is what you would call a divergence. Right, this is a divergence in history. That's a fancy word for turning point. Right, and you've got the convergence of a number of different. Oops, I'm writing on the wrong screen. Sorry. Right, so this is a divergence moment or a turning point moment. And when you're looking at this, there's a couple things converging all at the exact same time. Right, agricultural innovation, and you have introduction of new crops as well. So you're going to see a population population increase, and you could contextualize that by talking about maybe the Columbian Exchange and the introduction of the potato to places like Germany or Ireland. So we're seeing this, and then of course the private property rights protections that we're seeing put into place here. So we're seeing numerous things kind of coming together all at once to kind of create these preconditions. And of course, capital, right? There's, a large amount of capital flooding in. Flooding in. And when you look at this kind of capital through investment, and who is that coming to? It's coming to the merchants, right? And the merchants are going to be concerned about reinvestment, right? They're going to be concerned about reinvestment, right? Reinvestment of those profits. So, I mean, it's an interesting convergence of things that are all taking place in England at this time. And then so maybe China was too powerful, right? Maybe it was too comfortable. There's some kind of document support that you could pull to support that. All right, so these are kind of the basic reasons why we consider the Industrial Revolution to have begun in England and not elsewhere, right? Kind of unique things that did exist, right? But there's only a couple, right? Only kind of a couple unique things that kind of led to this kind of innovation explosion that takes place. And of course, the changes are dramatic, right? It's not just technological changes. The entire economic system changes. This is going to impact government. This is going to impact society as a whole. It's going to impact culture, right? So, when you look at the change that occurs from here to here, just kind of wrap your mind around this and this. One is the way in which society had been structured since the Neolithic Revolution. And the rise of societies, right? And then there's this, right? So, and of course, we're going to see this transition. So before the Industrial Revolution, there were cottage industries. That was the primary means of manufacturing. And this is largely what you see in Europe and China and in South Asia, is cottage industries. But England will transfer this, transition this with the enclosure movements. The English commons, right, are subdivided. All right. And of course, when we talk about the agricultural innovations that take place in England, crop rotations, Jethro Tull and the seed drill, enclosure movement is an agricultural innovation. It's also private property rights. Land reclamation taking place, right? Irrigation, in addition to these canals as well. And of course, the selective breeding. The average cow, weighs 370 pounds in 1700, goes up to 840, within 90 years, right? So that is done through selective breeding. And we're way before Darwin here. I mean, Darwin doesn't even get on the Beagle for another, gosh, what are we talking about here? 50 years, right? So we're not, and then we're more than that. It takes another 20 years for him to publish, So, there's massive agricultural innovation going on, right? Selective breeding, So, and this is where we are left today, right? So, the animals are much, much larger, right, than they ever were. All right, so it's see that kind of innovation, but it's innovation within the cottage industry, right? So this cottage industry innovation is going to result in the textile revolution that we often associate with the, with the Industrial Revolution. So I'm going to try to upload these onto my YouTube, and if I can't, then I'll just put a link for them on my website. Okay. Where am I here? The Flying Shuttle, right? John Kay. So 1730s. You're seeing kind of the early innovations in the textile industry. The spinning wheel, right? When you talk about the spinning wheel, this is an age-old, thing used for manufacturing within the cottage industries. And it's a millennia old, and and we're going to see a massive innovation made by Hargraves, right? And maybe by mistake. So I'll try to upload that video as well. All right. So major textile innovations that we see during this time: the Flying Shuttle, the spinning jenny, the spinning frame, the water frame, water power, the spinning mule. Okay. And now you're starting to get into steam, new sources of energy, the power loom, all right? So, and this is kind of the other convergence, all right? So let me kind of put this up here. If we're talking about the divergence and the reason for the divergence, right? We're talking about agriculture innovations, private property rights, capital, right? Now we're talking about textile innovation, right? And kind of the biggest one of all is an energy revolution. All right, there's an energy revolution taking place here. So we are replacing the traditional forms of energy that could be harnessed. Wind power, like windmills, right? Windmills, had traditionally been used for a lot of things. As far as kind of harnessing the energy from nature. Water wheels, right? So using retention ponds and streams and creeks and rivers to generate power through hydro, right? Through water, human power, right? Those things are going to be replaced now with fossil fuels, right? So this is, when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, it is a fossil fuel revolution, right? It's an energy revolution. It's a fossil fuel revolution. All right, and so we're starting to see this, and of course, there's all kinds of possible implications of these innovations as well. Many would argue that the cotton gin and the innovation of the cotton gin in the 1790s will result in an increase in slavery, because it made cotton production much more profitable. This is, you could definitely support this with evidence. I think you can pick this apart as well pretty easily. But the people who want to argue for this is the kind of general argument for. All right. Okay. But there's also this is gonna start a process that will continue. All right. Eli Whitney is not just the guy for the cotton gin. He'll go on to also do interchangeable parts and the such. All right. So we'll continue this discussion later. So, key takeaway, right? The Industrial Revolution started in Britain because it has a unique set of circumstances, but how many were actually unique, right? And lastly, the above can provide good categories of analysis, right? If you're looking to make comparisons, which is what we did in class, as we went through some of these comparisons. All right, that is all for today. I'm gonna wrap this up because I'm probably going too long. Sapriati.